We are in Parshat Shoftim. It's a little scary how quickly we're making our way through Sefer Devarim. Uh, we all know what's coming. It's a good Chodesh Elul tonight. And so we're officially in the season. And
Polish toad.
as they say, the holidays come either,
Really?
depending on your perspective, they're coming late this year, they're coming right on time. But we're making our way closer, and Parshat Shoftim is another really, really rich parsha. Um, the second half is um, is really the source for any discussion of a Jewish political theory in the Bible. With the I can't remember if it was last year or 2 years ago, we went a little bit in depth on what's called Parshat HaMelech, the section discussing the appointment of a king. Big debate whether that is something which is obligatory or something which is permitted if they choose, and lots of interesting discussion about whether Judaism sees the king as the ideal type of leadership, and how that all works. Lots of relevant discussion for the power and limits of power of the modern government of the state of Israel. There's also interesting discussion in the Parsha, again, not for tonight's shir, but about similar theme. The Parsha is the classic source for the rabbinic authority, the ability of the rabbis to institute and appoint mitzvot. And the big question that's asked is when we light Shabbos candles, when we wash our hands for Al Natilat Yadayim, when we light holiday candles, we say the bracha Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, that God has sanctified us and commanded us to perform this mitzvah, and most of those mitzvot are dirabbanans, are rabbinic commandments. So really interesting discussion about on what basis do the rabbis obligate us to perform these mitzvot, and then on what basis can we say that it's God's commandments and not the rabbi's commandment? So that's, again, for a different year. Maybe next year we'll delve a little bit more into that really interesting topic on the nature of rabbinic authority. But tonight we're going to look at another section that has very, very important relevance into what on the surface might seem like very different realms of modern day life. And we'll get there in a couple minutes. Some of you might have already looked and have an inkling of what those two areas are, where we might be going. But let's all get on the same page. So let me share the source sheet, and I will zoom in. I know we need to do that. Is that enough?
Yes.
Okay. Much. Okay, we're just getting the full width of it. Okay, so we are towards the end of the Parsha, and the Torah is describing Ki tatzor al el ir yamim rabim lehilachem aleha litafsa. If you are waging war against a city, and you lay siege to the city for many days, with the goal of conquering it, litafsa, to conquer it, to seize it. Lo tashchit et eitza lindoach alav garzen, ki mimenu tochal, ve'oto lo tichrot. You shall not cut the trees of that city to destroy its trees, wielding the axe against it, because you will eat from it. And this is a very troubling line. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh lavo mipanecha bamatzor. As we'll see, there's two very different ways of reading this. We'll just use the translation we have in front of us for the moment. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? Rak eitz asher teda ki lo eitz ma'achalhu, oto tashchit v'charata, vanita matzor al ha'ir, asher hu osem imacha milchama ad ririta. Only trees which you know do not bear fruit, you may destroy and cut them down and build your siege over the city which is waging war against you until it has been reduced. Okay, so we have in the ethics, in the rules of fighting war, a prohibition against destroying. Well, what are we not allowed to destroy? If we simple reading of these psukim,
Fruit trees.
we're not allowed to destroy fruit trees. And what's the reason given that we can't destroy the fruit trees?
Because we eat the fruit.
Because we eat the fruit. Okay. So what happens if you're a well-stocked, well-fed army that has, you know, all your MREs? Is that what it's called? Is that yeah, MREs? That's what the soldiers eat in the field. And you have, you know, you have lots of care packages coming in. You don't need to eat the fruit on the trees of the city that you're sieging. Are you allowed to cut the trees down then?
No.
Why not?
You can save the fruit.
Said you
Well,
can't.
that's not what it says. It doesn't say because you need to eat them, right now. It's more like in general, people need to eat them.
Okay, so not that you need to eat them in the here and the now of war, but in general, this is a food source for you, so therefore don't destroy it.
For people in general.
A food source for people in general. Okay. So let's just ask another, not such a theoretical question. Again, these are very live issues. What if the residents of the city that you're waging war against are able to hold out for longer because of the fruit that's on the trees in the city?
That's a problem.
What would we say in that situation?
It's not talking about the purposes of the fruit, who's going to use the fruit.
So therefore what?
It says you can only destroy trees that don't bear fruit.
Okay, so one way of reading it is any fruit tree is automatically off limits. Right? That seems to be the simple way to read the pasuk. Right? I think you're right, Cheryl. I think that's what the Torah is telling us. But there is that explanation that we need to explore a little bit. Kimi menu tochal v'oto lo tichot, because you will eat from it and you may not cut it down. Then we have that enigmatic line, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, is man the tree of the field? So let's see how Rashi reads that verse, that line. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, hare ki mishamesh bilshon dilma. The word ki in our verse functions, oh sorry, let me show you the Rashi. The meaning of possibly or perhaps. Is the tree, so that therefore it should be read as follows. Is the tree of the field perhaps a man who is able to withdraw within the besieged city from before you, that it should be chastised by the suffering of famine and thirst like the inhabitants of the city? Why should you destroy it? How's Rashi understanding that line? Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh.
He's reinforcing an idea that he had earlier in Numbers.
Okay.
I think it's chapter 13:20. I looked it up today, where there is a mention of the think it's in the section in the Miraglim, and I'm sorry if I don't remember if it was before or after they came or they went, but Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them, I think it's at the beginning, look to see if they have trees, in addition to other
Right.
things about the land. And so when I guess before she asked, well, why would he be interested in the trees, And there's this great funeral processions going on and all of that. And the spies see it as the land eating up someone, but others see it as a diversion that with the death of a tzaddik like Eov, and as a way of protecting the spies, actually. So that, and all of this comes together in that Rashi understands him asking about the tree. Is there a tzaddik there who would protect them from us? He must have the
Sadiq.
reminiscence of Og and other things in his mind, who knows? But anyway, that's how he understands it. So that the metaphor of the tree and the human being has already been expressed in the Torah.
Okay, interesting. So just focused on what Rashi says. What's Rashi's reason that we can't destroy the tree? And you're absolutely correct that the metaphor of trees is used very powerfully, right? We know that Torah is compared to a tree, Eitz Chaim Hi. Right? We know that the tzaddik is compared to a tree, tzaddik katamar yifrach. We say that in the Psalm for Shabbos, that a tzaddik will flourish like a date palm. So there is definitely something there, but I don't think that's quite the simple reading of Rashi here. What's Rashi saying in this comment? Why should we not destroy the fruit trees?
It's a punishment that the tree shouldn't have to bear. It certainly
Okay.
does not. It certainly does not suggest that.
Yeah. What did the tree do to you? Right. That's what he's saying. What did the tree do to you? Leave the tree alone. It can't defend itself. It can't speak up for itself. Right. Skipping ahead a little bit to the second half of the shiur, right? But remember the Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax?
Mhm.
I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees, right? So what the trees can't speak for themselves, that they can't defend themselves. So this is something that God created, and we have no right to destroy it.
The Romans had a different view. The
Okay.
Romans, when they conquered, they destroyed the trees. They
Right.
salted the land. They destroyed the water storage facilities that were built in the dams because they were making a point that should last for centuries. And that's one of the reasons that Eretz Yisrael for almost 2,000 years was a desolate place. And now
Yeah.
it's beginning to come back to what it could be.
Right. So we know of the many armies over the course of history have a scorched earth policy. And there's it makes good military sense in many ways. Right. So right, but that's not what the Torah is telling us, right? The Torah is not taking that military strategy. The Ibn Ezra has a slightly different read or understanding of this. We're going to skip one or two lines. Just trying to find where a great Spanish grammarian. We're going to start from there. Interestingly, I haven't been able to figure out which Spanish grammarian the Ibn Ezra is talking about, but but he says, "Midaktik gadol Sfardi amar ki chaser he." So one great Sephardic grammarian said that the word "ki" is lacking, is missing a hey at the beginning. V'chein and it should really, the verse really should read "Haki ha'adam eitz hasadeh," right? The hey there being a question, like Rashi said, right? So really, is man like a tree of the field? V'zetam einenu nachon be'enai. But Ibn Ezra says, I disagree with this. Kimatam lomar lo tashchit eitz pri ki einenu kivnei adam sheyuchal livrach mipanecha. Right? It doesn't make any sense. We all know that a tree is not a human. So how does it make sense that Moshe is rationalizing not destroying a tree because it can't run away? Of course it can't run away. It's a tree. Trees don't move. Trees don't run. So he says that can't be the right explanation. Ulefi da'ati, she'ein lanu tzorech l'chol zeh. So the Ibn Ezra says, my opinion is we don't need to add any extra letters or do anything like that. V'zeh perusho, and the meaning of our verse, of our clause, our line in the verse is ki mimenu tochal, because you will eat from it. Lo tichrot, don't cut it down. V'oto lo tichrot, don't cut it down. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, because man is tree of the field. Ki chaye ben adam hu eitz hasadeh, because human life is dependent on the tree in the field. Ki nefesh hu chovel, v'ki chay nefesh hu chovel. And if you destroy the tree, you are therefore destroying human life sustenance. Well, I mean, it's a little subtle, but what's the difference in approach between the Ibn Ezra and Rashi?
I don't think he's adding very much to the conversation, frankly, at this point.
Okay.
The nor, in a sense, even the way that Rashi expresses it, but he's certainly here that it's going to run away from you. That could be said of a tree that doesn't have fruit.
Right. So Rashi has to
I-
explain why it's only the fruit trees that are in this
Mhm.
prohibition, right?
It's really the fruit. It's not just the metaphor of the tree. It's the metaphor of the fruit. And it's the rest of the words before that are in the Torah and the words that are after this that are in the Torah clearly speak about trees as a life source for human beings because they can eat from them. But this phrase is the basis and considered for an incredibly beautiful set of insights. I know you don't want me probably to get into them because they can go on for a very long time.
Yeah. No. I mean, for sure, the metaphors and the analogies between trees and humans and trees and Torah and trees and life, it's all there. Yes,
No,
we could
but
spend a
fruitful
lot of
tree.
time. Yes.
What is a fruitful tree? What is a tree that has such deep roots that it, that kind of thing? I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much to it
Yeah.
that is so beautiful. And the Torah itself is putting it into the subjunctive in the first place because it's trying to say it's ridiculous to do this, but it just begs for elaboration. And I just want to say that the relationship between the intellect, which in psychology, when you do a set of tests with a person and you're asking them to do drawing tests, which are very revelatory of what's going on in a family or inside the person, the most instructive one, the tree that they draw.
Interesting.
That tree image has so much to do with them on the inside. I can just, I can tell you that it is extremely important. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful beginning. But let's ask, what is a fruitful tree? And how can we be fruitful? I mean, that's such a good question, I think.
That's a good enduring question for sure. Let me, the one explanation is that we might be able to think of the Rashi and the Ibn Ezra in very modern terms. And you can agree or not agree with this, but there are those who claim that Rashi is taking what we might call an environmentalist perspective, right? Rashi is saying, don't destroy trees because trees are of intrinsic value, right? The tree can't defend itself. God created the tree. So you want to add a religious element to it. Don't destroy the tree because the tree is of great, great value in and of itself. Whereas the Ibn Ezra is taking a humanistic approach. Don't destroy the tree because of the utilitarian value that the tree offers to humans. Right? You could read it, right? The humans that are currently fighting the war, the next generation that are going to live in the same city, the ones that are going to have to settle. And if you destroy the trees, then you're going to have to wait a whole generation before you're able to really live there and sustain yourself on the land. So he's taking the approach of human welfare. We don't destroy the trees because of the need to protect and preserve human life. So those are that's how some people want to see this difference in interpretation. And I'll add a third to the mix. Let's skip down to source number 5, the Ramban. The Ramban, actually, this is one of the few times where he agrees with the Ibn Ezra. He says the Ibn Ezra translates this nicely. Usually he's very hostile to the Ibn Ezra. Okay, so but then if you could skip a couple lines in the Ramban, where should we start from? Aval al dat rabotenu. But in the opinion of our rabbis, Aval, and if I have to scroll down, someone please tell me when it's time to scroll down. Aval al dat rabotenu, mutar lichot eitz ma'achal livnot matzor. Okay, so opposed to the simple, straight reading of the pasuk that Cheryl offered to us, that we can never destroy a fruit tree, the rabbis in the Gemara and Bava Kama actually say that if it's integral to laying siege on the city, then you can, in fact, cut down a fruit tree. Right? If you need to, if it helps your military cause, then you can. The only thing that's being forbidden is unnecessarily destroying the fruit tree. Lo amra Torah rak eitz asher teda ki lo eitz ma'achalhu v'gomer elo lagdim v'omar she'ilan tzrak kodem le'ilan ma'achal. And on the flip side, even destroying a non-fruit-bearing tree is only allowed for the purpose of a siege. You can't unnecessarily destroy that tree either. And if there is a grove of trees that is in the way of your military objectives, so then the Torah is telling us, according to the Ramban, summarizing the Gemara, that you should first destroy the non-fruit trees, and then if you need to continue, you can proceed to destroy the fruit trees. Okay, so he both expands and limits the scope of this prohibition. He expands it to non-fruit bearing trees, but he limits it by saying that it's that it's allowed if it's integral for the siege that you're trying to lay. Im kain perusha parsha ledatam sheyitzira Torah lo tashchit et eitzah vichot otam derech hashchata shelo letzorech hamatzor. If that's the case, then what the Torah is really telling us is you can't destroy its trees in order to just destroy them for the sake of destruction, not related to the siege. But if it's for the purpose of the siege, then you're allowed to. Kamin hagamachanot, right? Like other armies do, like Robert explained to us. Hatam, the reason is that oftentimes warriors will destroy a city and its environs. Right? Maybe they can prevail, they can win. Kinyan shenemar, okay, vatem lo tasu kain lahashchita. But you, the Torah is telling us, cannot do this for destruction. Ki tiftechu b'Hashem sheyitain ota biyadchem. Rather, you should trust in God that He will deliver the city to you. So for the Ramban, what's the driving purpose rationale for this prohibition?
There's got to be a purpose for the tree.
Okay. But if we're going to say that Rashi is the environmentalist and the Ibn Ezra is the humanitarian, the Ramban seems to be the theologian or the Rebbe, right? You have to have faith in God. Don't just destroy everything in your path because you can. Rather, have trust that God will deliver victory to you, even if you're not as destructive as you could physically be. Yeah, you could drop a bomb on the whole city. You can wipe out all the trees and all the buildings and raze it to the ground. But that's trusting in your in your technology, and that's trusting in your in your might. Rather, you should trust that God will deliver it to you in the way that God deems fit. You don't have to be overly destructive. Okay, so we have three very different approaches to understanding this, and as you can imagine, there is great relevance to the ethics of warfare. There's great discussion based on this pasuk and the understanding of this pasuk over what is legitimate, right? We touched on this a little bit over the summer during the learning in the afternoon session that I led, right? And Israel, this is what Israel is being criticized by much of the world for. Right? This is one of the big critiques, right? We can raise the same question in other wars also. It's not just Israel. Right? Not only the question, again, it's hard to say not only, but right, there's the question of loss of human life and the question of loss of civilian life. That's a very important question. And then there's also the question of physical damage, and is what's legitimate and how far is too far when fighting a war. So I just brought again, there's books and books and books written on this topic, but just a little taste. I mentioned over the summer. I think I mentioned in this class also, right? Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody wrote a fascinating book called The Ethics of Our Fighters. And it so happened that this book was in the works and was released right around the time of the atrocities of October 7th. So it's taken on even more relevance as a practical guide and not just theoretical discussion. So he writes, we'll start over here. As such, intentional, indiscriminate bombing has no justified place in 21st century warfare, particularly when we have smart bombs and other precision weaponry. The aim should be, I think I skipped a word or two here, is to eliminate factors that cause military harm. In practice, this also means we should not aim for civilian targets, even for the sake of scaring the people or deterring them. In general, the attempt to target civilian morale had a checkered rate of success in the 20th century. Even Sir Arthur Harris, the head of the British Air Force, whose strategy of strategically bombing German industrial cities during World War II, would later concede the idea to break enemy morale proved to be totally unsound. Morale bombing was completely ineffective. So that's one, right? So that's we have to check our military capacity and only do what's necessary to win the war and not go beyond that. And to use destruction of property, again, this is a very common war tactic. I would venture to say that every army is guilty of it in some sense. But that destruction of property in order to instill fear is not a legitimate approach and may not even be an effective approach. But that's that's one important area. Just to read another passage on this, again in the context of contemporary wars, the biblical passage on fruit trees teaches that we should think twice before quickly destroying critical civilian items. Once the hostilities are over, those essential resources take a long time to rebuild. After the Persian Gulf War, for example, water supply and quality were severely hampered because the loss of electricity damaged the function of waterworks. Much suffering and dangerous resentment ensued. It's to everyone's benefit to minimize the long-term damage of warfare as much as possible in the confines of executing a winning strategy. Nonetheless, there are real immediate consequences to not targeting critical facilities. War will always have some long-term ramifications on civilian infrastructure and life, even as we should try to minimize it. Right? So it's not, there's not a clear line, right? We have to, but we again, and this is a summary of many, 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 many sources and rich discussions, but that there has to be some holding back as well. Any questions or comments on this piece of it?
Just made me think of the decision to drop the atomic bombs on Japan at the end of World War II.
Yeah, so that's even a more complicated question because that also led to tremendous loss of life, right? So that's this is talking about property damage, and even if you were able to spare all the lives to save everyone, um, and yeah, so certainly when there's loss of life involved, it's even a more complicated question, and how do you weigh? Did it really, were the lives saved? How can you really know how many lives were saved by not having to have a ground war? Again, these are difficult questions to answer, but important questions to ask. Um, so it's quite interesting because this is such a rich, rich, important discussion that the halacha takes our verses, takes our pasuk, takes our concept in a radically different way as well. Not to say that the military conversation and questions aren't important, but if we look, and again, it's just easier to bring the Rambam, who summarizes earlier sources. The Rambam tells us as follows in Hilchot Melachim, the laws of kings and their wars. And again, when it's time to scroll down in the English, someone please let me know. Ein kotzatzin ilanei ma'achal shachutz lemedina ve'ein monin mehem amat hamayim kedei sheyivshu. So you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees or food-bearing trees even outside of the city, nor can you uh, divert water away from them, right? It's not only the act of chopping down the tree, but even, right, any way, any method of killing the tree is equally problematic. Shene'emar lo tashchit et eitzah, as it says, do not destroy its trees. V'chol ha'kotzeh kotetz lokeh. Anyone who does cut down a tree or kill a tree in this manner receives lashes as a punishment. Lo b'matzor bilvad ela b'chol makom. It does not apply only in a siege, but it applies in all situations. Kol kotzetz ilan ma'achal derech hashchata lokeh. Anyone who cuts down a tree with fruit in a destructive manner receives lashes. Aval kotzetzinoto im haya mazik ilanot acherim. You are allowed to cut it down. It's not, again, as Cheryl told us, might be the simplest reading of the verse, right? It's not an absolute blanket prohibition. You can never cut down a fruit tree. If that one fruit tree is causing harm or damage to other trees, or as we'll see, other important things, if it's causing harm, then you can cut it down. If it's damaging other people's field, or if the value of the tree, of the wood, is very expensive, right? Cherry wood, furniture, whatever. So if there's another important, valid use for it. Lo asra Torah ela derech hashchata. The Torah forbade destroying it, cutting it down in a destructive, what we call a wanton manner.
But this is directed individually. How about the military chiefs or the government, the military?
So that's a question, meaning who bears the responsibility, right? If a soldier is told by the commander, cut down this apple tree because we need to set up a camp here, or we need to starve the city. So is that the general? Is the general the one who's held accountable, or is the soldier held accountable? Right? So that's another technical question. Who bears the guilt? Someone's guilty. Someone's wrong. Right, and that's true. Who's responsible? The president who authorizes the dropping of the bomb, or the pilot who flies the mission and drops the bomb? Right. So yeah. So there's discussion about that also. Who bears the responsibility? Who bears the onus? But certainly it's not allowed. Right. Both for an individual, for a farmer, for whatever, or for someone in the army. Kol ilan srak mutar lakototo afilu eno tzarichlo. The Rambam holds that a non-fruit bearing tree can be cut down even if there is no need for it. V'chein ilan ma'achal shehiskin ve'eno osa ela davar mu'at she'eno ra'ui litroach bo mutar lakototo. If you have a very old tree that's not really producing much fruit and it's not worth the effort and the cost to continue to maintain that tree, that tree can also be cut down according to the Rambam. And he tells us exactly how much is considered a non-productive tree, to Anne's point before. V'lo ilanot bilvad ela kol mishaber kelim v'korea bigadim v'hores binyan v'sotema ayan u'mabed ma'achalot derech hashchata. This is true not only when it comes to trees, but anyone who breaks vessels or utensils, or tears clothing, or destroys a building, or blocks up a spring, ume'abed ma'achalot derech hashchata, and wastes food, over below tashchit. Right? This is a famous phrase that you'll often hear teachers reprimand their students about, bal tashchis. It's destruction. It's destructive. It's wasteful. And there's a prohibition, a Torah prohibition, the Rambam says, against being destructive, against being wasteful. And so it's true not only of fruit trees, not only of destroying fruit trees, but the Rambam expands it to any wasteful act, any wasteful destructive act it falls under this umbrella. He does tell us, Eino loke ela makat mardut midivrehem. The punishment is a rabbinic punishment. To be punished on a biblical level applies only if you cut down an actual fruit tree with an axe, right? That or destroy a fruit tree. But rabbinically, it gets expanded to any other act of destruction. Okay, so we have a very different application of our same pasuk. The pasuk is clearly talking in its original context, in the context of war, and the proper ways to fight war, to wage battle. And now it's expanded to being a prohibition against any wasteful, destructive act. And right, so this becomes not only a great source for Jewish parents who get upset when their children don't eat all the food off their plate, and it becomes a great, all the waste that we see, God forbid, in our world. But this becomes a rallying call for environmentalists in our day, right? Back to the Ibn Ez, back to our Rashi, the Rashi approach that we said might be an environmentalist approach. This is one of the key sources about why we need to protect the world and protect the planet. And so we have this one verse which is taken in two very important. I think they're somewhat complementary, but very different perspectives, very different approaches and applications in the real world to this pasuk. Any questions or thoughts at this point? So I did want to bring one more really interesting source that has stuck with me ever since I learned it for the first time. That's the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos is commenting on a Mishnah that talks about someone who is korea et bigadav bechema, someone who tears their clothing as an act out of anger, out of an act of frustration. So the Gemara, it's picking up in the middle of the conversation, so it's not so smooth. But the Gemara says, Amar deshmat le Rabbi Yehuda b'mitakin b'mekalkel mishamiat le. There's a larger debate over whether someone is legally liable for a Shabbos violation only for a productive act or even for a destructive act. And so in the context of talking about tearing clothing, it asks, how could Rabbi Yehuda hold someone liable for destroying clothing, which is a destructive act, when Rabbi Yehuda generally holds that only constructive acts are liable. Okay, that's a little bit of a complicated background, but this is the key line. Amar Rabbi Avin, Hai Nami Mitakinhu. Tearing clothing is a constructive act. How's it constructive? Ka'avid nachat ruach liyitzro. Because you are calming yourself down, right? You're channeling your anger and you're using that as a calming mechanism, as a method to calm yourself. And after you tear the clothing, or after you smash the plate, or after you whatever, you feel better about whatever was bothering you. So there is a productive, constructive element as well, which is quite interesting. So again, the general gist of the prohibition of Baal Tashchit is that we're talking about totally unnecessary wanton destruction. If there is some productive reason why the destructive act has to take place, either because it's causing damage to someone else, or there's a better use for the space or the area or the resource for the wood versus the fruit. So then it would be permitted, and so that applies even to the psychological realm as well. That if someone is if this does really bring some calming, so that at least according to one opinion might be legitimate. And then the Gemara questions it, and it actually goes a little extreme. Is that really permitted? Okay, so we have this thought that maybe the productive, the helpful destruction would be permitted. Is that really the case? V'hatanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Chilfa bar Agra Mishum Shamar Mishum Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. We have a big chain of rabbis being quoted. Hamakareya bigadav b'chamato, v'hamishaber kilav b'chamato, v'hamifazer ma'otav b'chamato, yehi beinecha ke'oved avodah zarah. If someone tears clothing out of anger, or breaks vessels out of anger, or throws their money to the ground out of anger, you should see them as if they're an idolater. Okay, so very extreme, very harsh counter position to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Some will say that this is a productive, psychologically beneficial act, and some will say this is an act akin to idolatry. Bottom line is, right, if you're destroying something or you're wasting something without good reason, it's really not so good. I think that's a fair takeaway from this. But there's this two sides to it again. Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
What about at a funeral, tearing clothes?
Right. So that's a good question. Again, there seems to be some, that's a sign of, there's a constructive element in that it's a sign of mourning. There's a really interesting discussion about many of the rules of mourning as to, whether they are expressions of emotion or they're props to get you to express emotion. So, so if, right, for some people, that's just what you do in the moment of loss, and it's supposed to be, Kriya is supposed to be torn at the moment of greatest intensity. So there's actually different traditions where I think most of us are used to Kriya being torn if the funeral is taking place in a funeral home, so when the family is alone in the room right before the service begins. Others have a tradition of tearing Kriya during burial, as part of the burial, right before burial, that might be a more emotionally intense time. So there is a school of thought, there is a position that says, well, this is just raw human emotion. And, you can make a halachic argument that someone who's in this stage of mourning is not bound to, that doesn't keep all the mitzvot that we normally would keep. But there might be some psychological benefit to it. And then there's also um, discussion about whether after the Shiva has ended, if you're allowed to repair the tear that was made. For some relatives you are, for some relatives you're not. But you're in any case, you're always allowed to like pin the clothing back together. So Kriya, it's a really good question, Gwen, but I don't think Kriya is seen as an act of literally destroying the clothing to the point of not wearing it.
No. Yeah.
I mean, in our day and age, that often does become the case because, thank God we're comfortable enough that we can do without this one shirt. It might be a problem if we could fix it and we don't. It might be a problem of al tashchit. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but certainly something which is mandated by halacha, and we see the benefit both as far as the emotions that it gives expression to, and the sort of public sign for others. I think would factor into why that's a legitimate act. But
Yeah.
it's
Thank
it's
you.
an interesting question. Yeah, really good question. Any other questions or thoughts, comments? So again, it's a lot to think about, and like I said, it just stems from one very short section in our parsha. Really, the whole discussion is based on one enigmatic line, Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh. That's where it all begins from, and from it we have really, really important discussion about certainly about military ethics and how to fight, the application in war and legitimate warfare, and what's allowed and what's not allowed. But also this discussion of Bal Tashchit and not not being wasteful, whether it is a legitimate and correct application to put it in the context of discussions of environmentalism and global warming. There certainly are many, many who do so. And it's something that, as Gwen's question led to in a sort of roundabout way, that most generations of Jews before us didn't have the luxury to entertain being as wasteful as we're able to entertain. And so, when it comes, the amount of food that gets thrown out in all of our homes, our ancestor, our grandparents even would shudder to think about it. Um, and so it's something that's easier for us to overlook. Not that we're all rich and wealthy, but we're all, thank God, comfortable enough that we might lose some sensitivity to this very important issue, and that there's you know it's not only it's about the values and not what the wastefulness might lead to. That's just as important as if we can afford it or not afford it. So again, I hope I gave us what to think
It
about.
seems to,
Go ahead. What were
it
you saying?
seems that if a supposed rabbi is trying to convince somebody or sway somebody or something like that, here are sources,
Yeah.
Torah sources, to, to bring up, to rely on. In other words, it's not just talking out of
No, for sure, for
personal
sure, for sure.
feeling, whatever. So that's always so good.
Yeah, right. And then, but I mean, again, there's definitely other sources that can and should be brought if you're looking for bottom line, what's allowed, what's not allowed. Can I use, um, and there's all sorts of factors that go into it. But yeah, this is definitely a good primer for framing conversations and thinking about what Judaism has to say about some very important issues.
Ann and
Yeah.
I have one question,
What's that?
not related, but
Okay.
if one owns a house and leaves it, so one is supposed to leave the mezuzot up,
Correct.
yes?
Correct.
Okay, but what if it's going to be inhabited by non-Jews?
Right. So then the halacha says you can and perhaps should take it down because we're afraid that it will not be treated properly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. So I wish everyone a good night, a good week, a good Chodesh, and it should be one where we hear good news. We've heard a lot of bad news lately. We need some good news.
Amen.
Thank you,
Okay.
Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. You
You
too.
too.